A weirdly common problem in Final Fantasy XIV, possibly especially because of the age of the game combined with the amount of changes the game has got over the years, is that some players will claim that something is true without ever checking if it actually is, either because they assumed it is the way they think or because it was like that at some point. Welcome to Final Fantasy XIV Mythbusters, where I and my friends highlight the odd claims and misconceptions players make, and test them to see whether they are true or not, while also explaining how you can test it yourself, so you can learn how to science stuff in Final Fantasy XIV. Number 1. Don't put healing over time on the tank when they're pulling, you will steal aggro from them. As of patch 6.2, healing over time effects were changed to no longer generate enmity with each tick. They still generate a minuscule amount of enmity when they're placed. This is normal, as all buffs and nearly all actions generate a negligible amount of enmity. This includes ninja mudras, if you needed an example of how widespread this is. You can see proof of this change in the patch 6.2 patch notes. However, if you ever wanted to demonstrate this, grab your favorite friend, have them smack a striking dummy, just once is enough, then apply your healing over time effect to them and observe that the initial placement of the HOT generates a small amount of enmity. Yet, the healing over time ticks that follow do not. Just to add to this, I just want to highlight that even if healing over time effects generated enmity, this has not actually been a relevant issue since early Shadowbringers given how much enmity tanks generate. The only way for this to actually become a problem for anyone is if they rely on face-pulling aggro by simply running into mobs. But why would you do that? Furthermore, if this minuscule healing over time aggro was a problem, then I'm very curious what you do about the much greater amount of enmity that the DPS players are generating as they run along the mobs. Number 2. Fey Illumination does not affect Embrace or any other effects generated by the Faerie itself. This one is actually true and is one of the weirdest interaction exceptions in the game. Normally, the way pets interact with raid buffs is that as long as it affects nearby party members, then it also affects the pet in some way. For that reason, you'd assume Fey Illumination would affect the pet, right? So, first off, in the quote-unquote win column is that Fey Illumination increases healing magic potency, which means that if it worked on your Faerie, it would only increase the healing done by Embrace and Seraphic Veil, as they are labeled as spells. We spoke about the subject of what healing magic potency affects in the first episode of this series. As such, to test that Fey Illumination does not work on the pet, all we have to do is check how much healing Embrace normally heals for, and then check again with Fey Illumination active, and observe that the healing amounts are unchanged, which is what happens. Now, a possible reason why the Faerie isn't actually affected by its own Fey Illumination is that anything that affects yourself and nearby party members will say self and nearby party members explicitly in its tooltip. Now, you might notice if you carefully read any of the party-wide effects that the Faerie can cast that it never says self in the tooltips. On the other hand, Summoner's Radiant Aegis says that it applies a shield to self and not something like owner, so that one is also a little bit inconsistent. Another possible reason why the Faerie doesn't benefit from its own Fey Illumination could be that while Embrace is labeled as a spell, maybe the game observes it as an ability, making it not benefit from Fey Illumination. Number 3. Using Hallowed Ground with cover is a broken combo. You can block all damage for yourself and someone else. Cover is one of the weirdest actions in Final Fantasy XIV that players have access to. It leads to quite a lot of weird interactions. In particular, anything that an attack applies as a result of damage will always be redirected to the paladin that used cover. Often, even things that don't do damage gets redirected. This means, for example, that the paladin can yoink a debuff that is intended to result in a tank switch, completely removing the need to do so, and allowing the other tank to continue as they are. It can also lead to the paladin getting hit twice by a raid-wide attack, by redirecting the portion that someone else was intended to take to the paladin. However, cover has exceptions. It actually states so in the tooltip itself. Quote, does not activate with certain attacks, unquote. So that of course means that certain attacks in the game can completely bypass cover, usually like enrage attacks and stuff. However, that does not address the whole hallowed ground thing. Hallowed ground doesn't actually address cover at all. However, these two actions do in fact have a mutual exclusivity clause between them. You cannot both redirect damage to you and then also not take it due to invulnerability. How do we demonstrate this? You don't even need a player friend for this, simply grab your Chocobo companion. Engage combat with literally anything that can land a blow on your Chocobo companion. Make sure that your Chocobo gains aggro so that they are the ones tanking. Then use Hallowed Ground and cover in either order, it should not make a difference, and then observe that you still take damage. Weird, why is that? Simply put, if this interaction actually worked like you'd expect, then Paladin would uniquely be able to use its invulnerability to completely invalidate certain savage boss mechanics by using its invulnerability and cover to block a double tank buster on both tanks, for example. This would be something no other tank would be capable of replicating, and could lead to strategies that would require Paladin. Remember, you could even bring two Paladins so that they could alternate using this Hallowed Ground cover trick if the mechanic comes up more than once. So, presumably, the reason for this unintuitive interaction is that it would be too strong if it worked like that. Notably, all other damage reduction works just fine. It is simply that the quote-unquote set to 0 effect of Hallowed Ground isn't allowed to work with cover. Another notable difference is that PvP Paladin's Guardian and Phalanx combo does work together correctly as expected. However, those are two completely different actions. There is a very real possibility that this original claim stems from this. Number 4. Pets have been made so responsive that they always use your actions instantly when you order them. You might be thinking, what does this even mean? And what it does mean is that if you're running along playing normally, if your pet is following you or is stationary somewhere, they will usually use whatever you order them to within around half a second. As long as you don't summon something else in the immediately following half second, the pet will always use that action you requested. Now, you might realize there's something fishy going on when I specify you have to play normally for it to work like that. Before Endwalker, pets were significantly slower to act than they are now, which sometimes led to a pet taking over a second, sometimes multiple, to actually do what you ask them to. In Endwalker, this was tightened up significantly, and then the pet logic was further improved. However, it still has a priority list. The priority list of your pet appears to go as follows. 1. Place orders. 2. Action orders. 3. Automatic actions. 4. Moving to you assuming it is following you. So, someone playing a pet job, meaning summoner or scholar, normally will mostly be interacting with priority 2, 3, and 4. Maybe they will place their pet right at the start, or sometimes micro-adjust the pet a bit. Generally, this will at most delay the pet's ordered action by like maybe an additional half second, assuming you didn't order it to run to Narnia. However, this does still mean that a gimmick that I dubbed the Devotion Dance can be done. This is also what we will use to demonstrate that your pet absolutely will not use the actions you order instantly, should you somehow prevent them from doing so. To test this, order your pet to run as far as possible with the place action. Then, as they are running, queue up whatever ordered action you want them to use. Then, repeatedly and very aggressively, order your pet to run somewhere else over and over and over again so that the pet never reaches even close to its destination. Notice that the cooldown on the action you ordered is ticking down, and as long as you stop messing with your pet before around 30 seconds have passed, the pet will still cast whatever you requested once it reaches its destination. Why 30 seconds? I don't know, it just turns out that the pet has a memory of around 30 seconds. Now, what could you possibly use this for? Not much. A summoner could use this to run down the time of Radiant Aegis leading up to a pull if they like. A scholar could do the same with either Fey Illumination or Whispering Dawn if they so desire. but given that controllable pets these days only have defensive cooldowns, means there isn't that much to gain from this gimmick. Something worth taking from this demonstration is, however, that as your pet prioritizes the movement you requested higher than its automatic casts, means that if you really want to be sure that your Faerie keeps up with you on a big pull, it might help to order it to run ahead of you manually. I cannot speak on the efficiency or effectiveness of doing so, however, as I have no idea if this impedes the Faerie's ability to passively heal your tank as you run. Although it really shouldn't, since Embrace is instant. Number 5. Ray's invulnerability is removed by doing anything at all. This one is often caused by the simple fact that you rarely get the opportunity to actually test this effect when you get it. It also doesn't help that none of the Ray spells actually state that they apply this effect to begin with. Now, it is obviously incredibly simple to demonstrate that this claim is false, although slightly right. To test, what you will need is a blue mage and another player that can raise. You can be either of the two. Have the blue mage use self-destruct, then have the other player use their raising spell, then have the blue mage accept the raise. The tooltip reads as follows: Transcendent. Recently resurrected and temporarily invulnerable to most damage. Status ends upon execution of an action. Moving is not an action, but using sprint is. As such, the blue mage can safely run a little lap around the area without losing the invulnerability buff, as long as they don't use anything other than movement. This is also the reason why what is safest to do when you do get raised is to wait a moment for someone to heal you before you get rid of that invulnerability. You are, however, allowed to move to safety. Note also that someone else casting something on you also does not remove the invulnerability. It is only removed by the timer, 5 seconds, or you casting or using anything other than your feet. Also note that the buff itself said most damage, and that some attacks can hurt you through the invulnerability, and sometimes knockback effects, for example, can just push you off the arena and so on, so do be careful. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can let the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, before Eos and Selene were merged into one, Eos had a slightly different Fey Illumination that didn't reduce damage taken in any way. It increased healing magic potency by self and nearby party members. This is significant because that means the wording changed. Furthermore, as Eos was an entity with an HP bar, she could also have buffs of her own, meaning she was actually affected. Back then, Embrace also had a cast time, for what it's worth.